Hi, I'm Tim, welcome to our channel, and thanks for logging on. Today, we have a showdown between big three brand, stainless steel, sports calendar watches. It's Patek Philippe Nautilus annual calendar versus Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Perpetual calendar. Let the high-end games begin. Okay, this is the Olympics of the Titans. The timepiece here, of course, the watch of the moment, the Patek Philippe Nautilus in stainless steel. But you might ask, at face value, why are we comparing an annual calendar to a perpetual calendar? Well, let's briefly relate the fact that this watch, which costs $45,930 new, sells pre-owned for $105,000 to $110,000, whereas this watch, which sells for $60,900 new, now sells pre-owned for about $63,000 to $65,000. So in other words, people are willing to pay roughly $50,000 more for this watch, despite its $15,000 upfront discount compared to this watch. That's rather dramatic, and I'm going to ask why the Patek Philippe is worth so much more money. I might not agree, but I'm going to at least try to explore the concept. Now, the watch is robust, there's no doubting that. Highly anti-magnetic, highly water resistant, and perhaps a better all-around sports watch than the AP. The Nautilus is also a timepiece that wears better on a small wrist. Now, we'll talk about ergonomics as we often do first in this video. On my wrist, 16 centimeters in circumference, you can see that the Nautilus, 40.5 millimeters in diameter, is a fairly easy watch to wear. It's not as compact as the 5712 or the 5711, both of which are thinner and have more flexible bracelets. Let's give ourselves a bit more contrast too. But it is a timepiece that wears relatively flat and true to size when compared to any Royal Oak on a bracelet. So the timepiece, 40.5 millimeters in diameter, 11.4 millimeters thick, and if you were to measure it end link to end link, 51.3 millimeters across the wrist. Let me close up the bracelet and I'll give you a proper aesthetic assessment of the watch. Not sized for my wrist, but as close as I can come. It's an easy watch to wear. It's a comfortable watch, and between the two here, it's the easier watch to wear on a smaller wrist, even though it is the thicker of the two. We'll do a quick down the barrel shot of the watch. Wrist smaller than 15 centimeters circumference. In this test, you're going with the Patek Philippe. Inside the case, Patek Philippe manufacturer caliber 324. It's an LU with a moonphase. It's a 24H with a 24-hour dial. It's also a QA, quantième annuel. The timepiece needs to be corrected only once per year during the jump from February to March. Automatic winding, 35 to 45 hour power reserve, silicone hairspring, free sprung balance, 6-position adjustment. All of this water resistant to 120 meters. The finishing is exquisite, but you do have that center rotor blocking half the movement at any given time. Turn the watch over on its dial side, you can see the gray gradient that was introduced with the 5726 when the model bowed back at Basel 2010. So it's a sort of silver ardoise at the center, and it fades to almost black at the edge. All white gold indices. This watch has a beautifully balanced dial. You could split it down the center, it'd be symmetrical across. The 24-hour dial lets you know when not to attempt to set the annual calendar using the pusher adjusters. You've got a moon phase, which is actually more accurate than the watch, as the moon only needs to be adjusted once every 122 years. Then you've got center seconds, which is kind of critical because in a comparison of two watches, only one has a constant seconds display, and for some folks that's going to be mandatory. Now, jumping over to the AP, the Nautilus bowed in 1976, designed by Gerald Genta for Patek Philippe as an answer to his own 1972 Audemars Piguet Royal Oak. So these watches, though somewhat different in function, are very similar in history and design genetics. So you can see how one clearly flows from the design of the other. And this is the original, though a larger watch, 41 millimeters. This is a timepiece that bowed back in 2015, the launch of the latest generation Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Perpetual calendar. So it's 41 millimeters, as the standard Royal Oak has been since 2012, but it is a broad watch. It's also a watch that's a little bit thinner. In this case, 9.5 millimeters to the Patek's 11.5. That is significant if you want the most slender of watches on your wrist, but this is also a broad watch. Lug-to-lug, 51 millimeters, and you can see if you include the solid end links, these little intermediate plots that join the bracelet to the case, you actually have a rigid flare of 53.8 millimeters across the wrist. So if you have a smaller wrist, you can see I can barely fit this on my 16 centimeter circumference wrist. I would not go below 15 centimeters if you want to wear this watch comfortably. Could you get the diver strap? Yes, you could, but it's a Royal Oak, and like the Nautilus, the degree of hand finishing that goes into the bracelet is something that you're wanting from the moment you first realize you desire this kind of a watch. The integrated bracelet, lug, case, all of it designed as a piece and really somewhat naked and half-formed with a strap. You can see the perfect alignment of the beveling from the case band to the lug hood all the way down the links. You can see that in between the intermediate links, their facings are of high polish. You can just barely see the gleam as you roll it through the light. You can see on the side they're vertical satin finished and they're longitudinal satin finished across their top. Both of these watches extensively hand finished, and you can see that both watches feature a combination of polish and satin, though you will note that the Nautilus is considerably thicker. The two timepieces, a festival of finish, if you will, and a lot of the value of these two watches is down to the time it takes to finish the bezels, the cases, and the bracelets to spec. The dial of the AP, revealing both a photorealistic moon phase and the principal feature that bowed in 2015 with the next generation Royal Oak Perpetual calendar. You have a week of the year indicator, so you go from basically 1 to 52, and that week of the year indication orbits the dial that is otherwise symmetrical. Now, one feature that you lack here on a watch that seemingly has everything is any kind of a constant seconds display. There is nothing to show you that the watch is running outwardly, and for some folks that's going to be advantage Patek Philippe. One quality that I like about the AP, and I actually consider the AP to be an aesthetic success over the Patek in this regard, is the use of the pantograph cut Grand Tapisserie dial. You can see that richly textured hobnail that's actually cut on a pantograph, which is a mimicry engine from the 19th century. Since 2012 this is done in-house at Audemars Piguet. You cut the dial blank and then you galvanize blue, the blue generally being a boutique exclusive and a lovely hue that is original to the Royal Oaks. The 1972 original did feature a dark navy blue dial. It also has a high rejection rate, which is why the blue is the rarest of the mainstream dial colors. You can see the photorealistic moon disc as well as the lush cosmos beneath. It's somewhat more involved than the fairly standard, and one might even say fairly pedestrian moon phase disc of the Patek Philippe. Now diving a little bit closer, you can see that like the Patek, there's a screw down crown. Unlike the Patek, there's really no flanking structure, as the winglets of the Patek are unique to its design. Underneath the caseback, a movement originally designed for AP, Vacheron, and Patek. In its base form, it's the AP 2120. Patek Philippe used it in the original reference 3700 Nautilus, the 28255 movement, and Vacheron continues to use it as the 1120. Designed as the JLC 920 ultra-thin automatic in 1967, today this movement is built and finished entirely in-house by AP. Automatic winding, 40-hour power reserve. It features a free-sprung balance with a Gyromax architecture just like the Patek, but it does not have the silicone hairspring. 38 joule automatic. It beats away at a quirky and vintagey 19,800 vibration per hour, so you get a sense of the general age of this basic architecture. Perpetual calendar as opposed to the annual, this only needs to be adjusted in the year 2100 rather than once every year during the jump from February to March like the Patek. So this is a longer legged calendar system. It's just as beautifully finished as the Patek. One refinement that I happen to love is the skeletonized and hand finished rotor, which lets you see more of the movement than the solid rotor of the Patek. You'll also note there's an annular beryllium ring that runs around the outside of the movement. That's part of the secret to how JLC got this movement so thin. Most of the mass outboard, the actual rotor, is in the same plane as the bridges. It's hiked out over the bridges and then slung down and around. To prevent the rotor from coming in contact with the bridges during periods of shock or vibration, you have 4 jewels, ruby rollers, and the beryllium ring on which this mass is mounted slides and rotates on those 4 rollers. It's a beautiful and nostalgic movement that's still at the top of the game in terms of refinement, slender profile, and thanks to AP finish. This watch internally is finished to a much higher level than the 15300s, 400s, and 500s. This is anything but AP's stock finish. You will want a loop for this watch when you buy it. So let's talk about the advantages of these two watches, starting with the Patek Philippe. Okay. Advantage up front, and this is a big one. It has a seconds hand. For some folks, a watch with a dead dial, it doesn't speak to them. The fun of a mechanical watch is the heartbeat and the staggering jump of that seconds hand as it sweeps the dial. So on that basis, a simple emotional count, advantage Patek. Let's talk about better fit on small wrists. There is no question. The AP is huge. I'm going to try to show you both back to back and just show you how much broader the AP is. When you look at the two, Crystal to crystal, you can see the AP is fairly huge. And if you have that smaller wrist, the Nautilus is going to be the easier watch to wear. 15 centimeters or smaller, go with the Nautilus. Water resistance, 120 meters, makes this a fully swimmable, no concern watch, whereas this watch, despite its screw down crown, is only 20 meters water resistant, meaning you shouldn't take it in the water at all. Now, a lot of folks are going to say, well, I have no desire to submerge my watch. This is a non-factor for me. But if you're on vacation at a swimming pool, will you really feel comfortable taking this watch off and leaving it anywhere? I find that's a security issue and a confidence issue, whereas this watch stays on the wrist without a second thought. Advantage, Patek Philippe. Movement tech. Now, the 324 is anything but a spring chicken based on decades-old movement architectures, but the reality is it does have a few refinements that the JLC-based AP does not have. It's a 28 8-beat rate for potentially higher precision than you get with the 19 8-beat rate of the old JLC movement. It features ceramic rotor bearings, unlubricated, for both higher efficiency and long-wearing durability. It features a guarantee from Patek Philippe that it will run to -3 + 2 seconds per day or better. AP makes no such attestation, and with its silicone hairspring, it's robustly anti-magnetic, whereas AP continues to use a magnetically susceptible ferrous hairspring. So on a tech basis, the movement does have some advantages over the AP. Let's talk about Loom. It's better on the Patek Philippe, and you'll see that. I'm also going to mention that the watch is easier to read by day as well, and you can see side by side, the hands of the AP as well as the indices disappear somewhat into the dial, and I'll back up a little bit so you can see this to better advantage. From a distance, it can be downright difficult to read the AP, whereas the Patek is more evident, and this is, after all, a comparison of wristwatches. Telling the time still counts. We're still scoring on that basis. Finally, I'm going to mention that this watch is an absurd store of value for the moment. A timepiece that sells for $45,930 new and pre-owned only days later can sell for $105,000 to $110,000. That's insane. If you get a choice between buying one of these two new, go for the Patek Philippe without a second thought. Even if the bubble bursts, it'll be worth what you paid or more than you paid. Okay, let's talk about the Audemars Piguet. For some folks, there's no getting around the fact that the Royal Oak came first, 1972 versus 1976 for the Nautilus, and that ends all discussions. If you want the original, this is the original. There's also the issue of warranty. For some reason, Patek Philippe still offers only 2 years of warranty, and Audemars Piguet, through its boutiques and its retailers, offers 5 Advantage AP. This is a perpetual calendar. It is a smarter watch than the annual calendar. So Advantage, Audemars Piguet. Historically, this is a more important movement too, not just the model. While the watch is the original, everyone loves the old JLC 920. It's beautiful, it's nostalgic, it's a throwback to a different era of watchmaking. You get the DNA of Jaeger-LeCoultre with the finish and the integrity of Audemars Piguet. In the modern era, that's a tough combination to beat, and the history of this movement, having been used by all three great houses, but never by JLC itself, means that there is a mystique, an aura, and an attraction to this movement, in addition to the Royal Oak model line itself. I'll also mention that the Perpetual calendar has been in the Royal Oak model line since 1981, whereas the annual calendar Nautilus is a Johnny-come-lately, having only appeared in 2010. This is a watch that is more slender and more elegant. The Patek Philippe, in comparison, is chunky, and I'll show you that one more time. But the Patek is a chunky watch, and we're talking several millimeters, 9.5 millimeters versus 11.4. That's not even close, and it's evident on the wrist. So if you want a watch that's slender and accentuated by the fact that the Royal Oak is also broader, it seems far thinner than the Patek. This is a timepiece, let us not forget, that offers more dial and metal options. There are several different golds. There are several different dial colors, whereas with the Patek we have far fewer choices up front if we're buying new. I would also mention that on this watch, the links in the bracelet are fixed in place by screws, whereas on the Patek Philippe since 2012, cost cutting much? Pin sleeves are used. This is no bueno. I'm all about the way Audemars Piguet is making its bracelet. Finish is excellent on each bracelet. There's uncompromising finish on both, but the use of screws and just a few $100s added to production costs. Audemars Piguet is doing things the right way and keeping the faith. I'll also mention value. You want to buy one of these watches new? Well, Advantage Patek Philippe. You want to buy one of these pre-owned? You'll spend about $50,000 less purchasing the Audemars Piguet for $63,000 to $65,000 pre-owned. At 110 plus for the Nautilus in some cases, we're simply in we're in Looney Tunes land. We're in the realm where Bugs Bunny and the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote and Elmer Fudd chase each other in circles. There will be a time when that bubble bursts, whereas this watch, purchased pre-owned for 63, 64 grand, is likely always to be worth around what you pay for it. So on that basis, I consider this watch to be a superior pre-owned value. So now you guys, render your judgment. Which of these two do you prefer? I'm going to come out and say it. I love the Royal Oak. Borderline too small of wrist to wear it, but the history, the heritage, the JLC movement, the grace of the Perpetual calendar on a blue Grand Tapisserie dial, the fact that this watch is exquisite inside and out, right down to the detailed cosmos and the photorealistic moon, it just goes the extra mile that the Patek Philippe to me does not. This is an emotional hobby and an emotional pastime, and for me, the Audemars Piguet is the more emotional watch. Let me know, which of these two do you consider the more emotional watch for your lonesome? Tell me in the comments below. Audemars Piguet on the right, Patek Philippe on the left. Advantage Patek Philippe.